Today, we're going to be taking a look at how to roleplay a Goliath. We're going to take a look at what the player's handbook tells us about playing a Goliath in terms of their lore and their narrative. We're going to take a look at how that narrative is represented in the mechanics of what you get as a Goliath. And we're also then going to go through my favorite part, which is some useful questions that you can ask yourself to really bring a little bit of je ne sais quoi to your roleplay performance of your Goliath character, which is going to help them stand out from just any ordinary human. Let's take a look first of all at the narrative and lore that the player's handbook tells us about Goliaths. They are towering figures, ultimately, and they are descended from giants. That is the core concept of the Goliath character. Giant blood running through their veins. Each Goliath carries with it the favors of the first giants, granting them supernatural boons. And these supernatural boons include the ability to quickly grow and temporarily match the height of their giant ancestors. So Goliaths can grow in size. Now, their physical traits also reflect their giant lineage. Some, for example, will resemble stone giants, whilst others may take after fire giants or other types of giants as well. It's much more difficult, certainly in the 2024 rules, to just look at a Goliath and see the same sort of character. That kind of grog from Critical Role look is not necessarily universal anymore with Goliaths. They come in many different forms. Fire giants, for example, they might have a head of fiery hair or even maybe a fiery beard, perhaps. Who knows? That will be partly up to you, which we'll cover a little bit in a moment when we go through some of the questions that you can ask yourself. But despite their giant heritage, Goliaths have forged their own unique path in the D&D multiverse. They have managed to keep themselves a little bit separate in some respects from their giant ancestors, and they actually remain in that vein free from the conflicts that have historically plagued giant kind. Conflicts against dragons, conflicts amongst themselves. Much war has plagued the giant kind histories, and Goliaths are driven to surpass the heights achieved by their giant ancestors, which is the phrasing that is used in the player's handbook and doesn't really give us more than that. But hopefully some of the questions that we'll ask in a moment will be food for thought in that regard. Let's take a look then at how this lore that we've just looked at is represented in the mechanics of the Goliath. So these are the in-game benefits that you gain if you choose to play a Goliath character. First of all, the basics. They are considered a humanoid, as are all of the creatures in the 2024 Player's Handbook, and they have this size category of medium, though they are on the larger side of medium, standing at about 7 to 8 feet tall, so they are big. And they have a speed of 35 feet, which is one of the very few instances in the 2024 Player's Handbook where a character has a speed that is different to 30 feet by default. So they are big and they are fast. You also get giant ancestry as a feature. You're descended from giants as a Goliath, and so you get to choose one of the following benefits, which is a supernatural boon from your ancestry. You can use the chosen benefit a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, which at level 1 would be 2 times, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. This boon that you choose, as we'll take a look at now, will be representative of which type of giant you get your ancestry from. So if you are descended from a cloud giant, you get Cloud's Jaunt, which means as a bonus action you can magically teleport up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space that you can see, so you can bamf around the battlefield. If you choose to be descended from a fire giant, you get Fire's Burn. So when you hit a target with an attack roll and deal damage to it, you also then get to deal an extra D10 fire damage to that target. Again, you only get to do that a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, but at level 1, that'll be 2 times a day. You can deal an extra 1d10 fire damage, which certainly at first level is not to be sniffed at. If you want to be descended from a frost giant, you gain Frost's Chill. So when you hit a target with an attack roll and deal damage to it, you can also deal 1d6 cold damage to that target and reduce its speed by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. So it's not as much damage as the fire giant gets to do, but that is offset by the fact that you also are able to reduce the speed of the target by 10 feet. And interestingly, this doesn't have to be a melee attack. It can be a ranged attack. Perhaps you touch one of the arrows to use your Frost Chill and fire it, and as it strikes, it covers the enemy in a thin layer of frost, which is a pretty cool visual. So it's a little bit like a Ray of Frost in some respects, which is a wizard's cantrip. There are more, though. If you want to be descended from a hill giant, you gain Hill's Tumble. So when you hit a large or smaller creature, any of those size categories, when you hit them with an attack roll and deal damage to it, you can give that target the prone condition. So you can just knock them to their feet just by simply hitting them with an attack roll. Prone is going to give anybody in melee range advantage on their attack rolls against the foe, but disadvantage range. A very handy thing to have, and again, certainly pretty handy to have at first level. You'll gain Stone's Endurance if you choose to be a descendant of a stone giant. So when you take damage, you can take a reaction to roll a d12 and add your Constitution modifier to the number rolled, reducing the damage by that total. Stone's Endurance, I think, is one that people that have played Goliaths in the past will probably be most familiar with, because I believe that is the default feature that you gain from being a Goliath. That doesn't look to have changed at all if anybody is moving over from the 2014 Goliath to a 2024 Goliath. And then finally, if you choose to be descended from a Storm Giant, you gain Storm's Thunder. So when you take damage from a creature within 60 feet of you, you can take a reaction to deal 1d8 thunder damage to that creature, which is very cool. So when you get hit by something, even at range, you get to just blast them with a jolt of thunder as a reaction, limited to a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, which again, at level 1, will be 2 times a day. Some very cool Giant's Ancestry benefits, depending on which option you choose. And actually, I think they're all good. So really, go with what is thematically good for you. Or indeed, if you want to be a little bit more optimized, I'm sure there are better choices than others, but they seem fairly balanced to me. You also gain Large Form, but you only get this when you reach level 5. And this is one of the powers that was mentioned in the narrative. You get to change your size to large as a bonus action if you're in a big enough space. So you are a medium category creature, the next size up is large, which you get to utilize as part of Large Form. And this transformation lasts for 10 minutes or until you end it. There is no action required to end it as well. So for that duration, you have advantage on strength checks, and your speed increases by 10 feet, which will put you up to 45 feet, presuming there are no other boosts to your speed here. But once you use this trait, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. So you get to do it for 10 minutes every day. 10 minutes is one very long combat, a lot of rounds, and maybe if you're quick enough, you might even be able to get a couple of encounters in there as well. For an encounter, certainly, the boost to your strength and your speed could certainly be very useful. You also gain Powerful Build, so you have advantage on any ability check you make to end the grappled condition. You also count as one size larger when determining your carrying capacity. This is not something that you need to activate. It is just there all the time. So if somebody's trying to grapple you, or somebody is grappling you, and you're trying to break out of that grapple, you get advantage on those checks. And you counting as one size larger to determine your carrying capacity essentially doubles your carrying capacity, which is very useful if you are in a game that does worry about carrying capacity. I know a lot of games don't. I personally do take that into consideration as part of my games because I love to give my players more choices. And whether or not to pick up that big chest of gold and bring it around with you can certainly slow you down in combat, I think. But if you are playing a Goliath with a powerful build, perhaps it's not so likely to slow you down. But it does also mean that you're likely to become the party pack horse. Now is my favourite part of these roleplay videos, which is questions to ask yourself if you are playing a Goliath to make them stand out a little bit more other than just being a human with powers. First of all, and this is going to be an obvious one as you've chosen which giant ancestry you have. The question is, obviously, which giant ancestry did you choose, and how is that going to manifest? Obviously, in your abilities, that's covered mechanically, but also in your physical traits. Does your appearance or demeanor reflect your cloud, fire, frost, hill, stone, or storm giant heritage? What is it that you look like with relation to those? I mentioned, for example, you might have a Goliath with a fiery beard, or maybe as a storm giant, you might be surrounded by a very subtle aura of mist or something like that, maybe as a cloud giant. So think about, and I would certainly reference the monster manual or just Google it, what these different giants look like to give you some inspiration. That's certainly, I know when new players are introduced to my campaigns or new player characters, one of the first things I will say is describe what your character looks like to your party, and this is certainly a good place to start. So how do you feel about your connection to those first giants? Giants have a bit of a legacy of violence and stomping through things, conflicts and things. Are you proud of that lineage? Or do you actually prefer to try and distance yourself from giant kind's legacy? But generally, how do you feel about your connection to the giants? And again, this statement that comes up in the player's handbook about seeking heights above those reached by their ancestors. What motivates you to do that? Is it personal ambition? Is it honor, perhaps? Or a desire to leave your mark on the multiverse? Again, the giant legacy is fraught with conflict and violence. Perhaps that is something that factors in here. But the question specifically is, what is it that motivates you to step away? And maybe think here about those bonds and ideals from the 2014 version of the game. What is it that your character stands for, and what is it that they value? Perhaps that might be what motivates them. How does your towering presence impact your interactions with others? Are you intimidating? Does it make you protective, perhaps? Or maybe are you misunderstood due to your size and strength? I think of Lenny from Of Mice and Men. I think he very much fits that kind of stereotype of the towering brute that doesn't actually know his own strength. Is it that people are scared of you? Or is it that actually you mean, but perhaps you don't know your own strength? Perhaps you don't even realize how it feels to be one of the smaller folk, or even the average size folk in this instance. And also worth considering how you're interacting with humans, but also there's gnomes and halflings who are even smaller. How do you view the mutually destructive conflicts that have plagued giant kind for ages? Do you feel any obligation to resolve these conflicts or avoid them entirely? Giant kind in the D&D multiverse, at least by default, it will obviously depend on your DM, but at least for the default setting, giant kind is still around. There are fights that brew. You only have to look at Storm King's Thunder, for example, as an adventure. Again, their history is plagued with these conflicts that are destructive not only to those on the receiving end, but also giant kind themselves. Should that crop up in the campaign again, is this something that you're going to want to try and resolve? Or is this something that actually you're going to go, do you know what? Giants, fellow giants, this isn't my fight. Yes, I might be your descendants, descended from you, but actually, I'd rather not get involved. Thank you very much. What is your relationship with physicality and strength? We talked about perhaps you not knowing your own strength, but do you revel in these physical abilities, or do you view them as a responsibility? Are you the sort of character that is going to happily go into the fighting pits because you know you're physically stronger than most? Are you going to try and make some money off of your superior strength? Or, and I guess the parallel is pretty obvious, is it more like Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility. Spider-Man, of course, having gone and tried to make money off of his powers and learning the hard way that actually that might not be the best course of action. Are you more likely to utilize your physicality and strength to get yourself out of any situation, no matter the cost? Or is this something that you would rather use responsibly? And how do you use those supernatural boons, not only in combat, but in daily life? I think of the cloud jaunt, for example, where you're teleporting around. Are these tools that you do use on a daily basis? Are they tools for survival, expressions of your heritage, or symbols of power? Perhaps your character's appearance is more subtle. They look perhaps mostly like a tall human, except for some subtle things that you might have chosen on an appearance level. And perhaps then these supernatural boons you utilize often just to remind everybody that perhaps you're not so human after all. And what role does or will your ability to transform into a large form play in your identity? Of course, you don't unlock this ability until level 5, so your character may not have it yet, but your character is likely aware that it is an ability that they may have in the future. Could it be something that will make you feel closer to your giant kin, or is it actually something that's going to awaken a sense of awe or maybe even fear in you? Again, I think it depends actually on how much your character wants to separate themselves from giant kind versus how much they want to feel close to giant kind. If it's trying to separate, perhaps it is something that your character has a little bit of a fear of. Perhaps it is a little bit like the Incredible Hulk. God, all the Marvel references today. A little bit like the Incredible Hulk where you're trying to put a lid on it, but perhaps it is something that actually you do want to lean into a little bit more to, again, further express your pride in your heritage. And how do you navigate being part of a mortal society while being descended from giants? I'm using the term mortal here very loosely because, of course, Goliaths are mortals as well, but they are less human. They are a little bit more fantastical, perhaps, than humans and some of the other folk as well. Do you feel that you're actually caught between the two worlds? Do you feel like perhaps you don't belong in either the mortal society or indeed the giant society and you're caught somewhere in the middle? Or have you found a sense of community within this mortal society that you now find yourself a part of? And what challenges or prejudices have you faced due to your lineage and size? How have these experiences shaped your outlook in the world and your role within it? I think again to Lenny from Of Mice and Men, this huge man that does get a bit of discrimination against, a little bit of prejudice against him because he's seen as a brute. Is that something that your character might have had to deal with? And are those prejudices perhaps accurate? Does your character fit the mold in that regard? Or actually, are they the sort of character that breaks the mold of those prejudices and actually contradicts them, making them to be much less founded in reality than perhaps some might believe? And if you have been on the receiving end of those prejudices and challenges, again, how have they shaped your outlook on the world and how you interact within it? That is the Goliath questions on how to roleplay a Goliath. I hope you found some of those useful, certainly in relation to the various ancestries now. Perhaps I should do a video in the future specific to the various ancestries within the Goliath species, specifically looking at a fire giant Goliath versus a cloud giant Goliath, for example. But if that is something that would interest you, do let me know in the comments below, and I will add that to my list of videos to tackle in terms of these guides for role-playing these various species in the D&D multiverse. And if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well.